perfect example of that. Our membership has doubled during the last 3 years, so today we have nearly 100 members ranging in age from 16 to 86. The love of music is something we all share, we have it in common regardless of our age. The band, as Ed mentioned earlier, is made up of volunteers from Olathe and surrounding communities, and some of our members come as far as 30 or 40 miles from both the east and the west in order to participate. We're always happy to have new musicians, and as Ed mentioned, all arranged by Sammy Nestico, and will feature our tuba soloist, Keith Esau. Ed?
For those of you that have heard Persuasion a lot, I doubt that you've ever heard it with tuba solo. However, I don't even know why, it stuck in my memory that there's a tuba part stuck in the back behind all the other stuff. And I called Ron at Winger Jones. He said, yeah, we've never used one, but there is a tuba solo part written for Persuasion, and Keith's going to do that. Keith is a graduate of Tabor College, and he was actually a music major at Tabor, but he decided to go out and make real money. So instead of using that degree, Keith is a computer programmer now, and we'll feature him on Persuasion.
second American Folk Rhapsody is a collection of well-known American folk songs. I'm sure you would recognize titles such as Billy Boy, Skip to My Lou, and Shenandoah as the band performs a very familiar work, Second American Folk Rhapsody. schedule each year. It includes about 30 rehearsals and 10 performances, mostly in and around the Johnson County area. We have 3 more concerts scheduled in our summer series, which will end early in October. Then we're going to begin preparing for the holiday season, which will include our annual winter concert, performance for the lighting of the Olathe Mayor's Christmas tree, which, by the way, is a televised event. And then last season, we also had the opportunity and the privilege of appearing at a ceremony that honored the nation's Christmas tree. It stopped in Olathe on its way to the Capitol lawn in Washington, D.C., so we were proud of that. We'd like to switch gears just a bit now with the selection the band always enjoys playing, and everyone seems to enjoy hearing. This piece features our Dixieland combo. It's comprised of Rob Waylander on trumpet, Al Nelson on saxophone, Keith Esau on tuba, Ron Ernst on drums, John Weatherwax on trombone, and Clive Isom on clarinet. As you listen to the tunes such as Do Lord and Just a Closer Walk with Thee, we hope you too enjoy the gospel in Dixieland.
Jim Player's Gospel in Dixieland in your libraries. That isn't exactly what's on the page. If we had to have Clyde write out all those notes he plays. By the way, Clyde, stand up. Clyde is 83 years old. Stand up, John. Who's 80?
Since 93.
playing on August 14th, that's our summer concert. We'll be playing on September 8th, and that's at Old Settlers Days in Olathe. And on October 6th for Oktoberfest in Overland Park. The Olathe Civic Band, everyone here, would like to thank you very much for coming this evening and for inviting us to be part of your annual convention. We certainly hope you've enjoyed the concert as much as we've enjoyed being here. Our final selection for this evening is dedicated to the United States Army's 16th Cavalry Regiment. Cross Sabers was written by CW4 Charles Booker, Jr., who was retired bandmaster for the United States Army Band. The trio of the march begins with an introduction using material from an old song, The Girl I Left Behind Me. In the breakup section, note the bass drum solo, which answers the cavalry's call to draw sabers.